Somewhere in northwest Wyoming right now, the largest operating steam locomotive on the planet is rolling down the main line with a plume of smoke you can see from 20 miles away, and thousands of people are lining the tracks with their cameras and their grandchildren, waiting to catch a glimpse of something they thought they would never see again in their lifetime. Union Pacific calls it a celebration of America's 250th birthday, a tribute to the men who built the Transcontinental Railroad, a rolling monument to the golden age of steam. And if you are standing trackside watching that 1.2 million pound machine thunder past you with 16 driving wheels pounding the rail, you might actually believe them. But there is a story behind this tour that Union Pacific is not putting on any of their commemorative t-shirts. A story about timing and money, and a corporate chess move so brazen that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It starts with the question that nobody at the Cheyenne Steam Shop wants to answer. Why now? Why this route? And who exactly is this tour really for? Big Boy 4014 left Cheyenne on March 29th, heading west toward California, the first leg of what Union Pacific is calling a coast-to-coast tour. When they announced it back in February, they made sure everyone knew it was going to be historic. There were 27 whistle stops across Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and California, and 4 public display days where people could walk right up to the locomotive and feel the heat radiating off the boiler. Then, sometime in late May, the eastern leg would begin, taking the Big Boy to places it has not been since it rolled out of the Alco factory in Schenectady, New York, back in 1941. The East Coast, Philadelphia for the 4th of July, maybe Boston, maybe New York. These are places that have never seen a Big Boy under steam. Places where the only people who remember these locomotives are the ones whose fathers brought home stories from working the Wasatch grade 60 years ago. The kind of tour that rail fans have been dreaming about for decades, and Union Pacific was going to make it happen. Here's the thing though, Big Boy 4014 cannot get to the East Coast on its own. Union Pacific's network covers 23 states, but they are all west of the Mississippi, and if you want to run a steam locomotive from Cheyenne to Philadelphia, you need track that belongs to somebody else. Specifically, you need track that belongs to Norfolk Southern, the Class 1 railroad that dominates the eastern half of the country, the same Norfolk Southern that Union Pacific is trying to merge with in what would be the largest railroad consolidation in American history, an $85 billion deal, a combination that would create a single transcontinental railroad for the first time since Leland Stanford drove the Golden Spike in 1869. And when the Surface Transportation Board rejected Union Pacific's merger application in January because they left out some critical documents, the railroad announced they would refile by the end of April, right in the middle of the Big Boy Tour's western leg. Now, I am not saying Union Pacific scheduled their most ambitious steam tour ever to coincide with the most controversial merger proposal in modern railroad history, just to generate goodwill and positive press coverage at the exact moment federal regulators are deciding whether to let them swallow one of their biggest competitors. I am not saying the timing is suspicious. I am just telling you what the timing is, and you can make up your own mind about whether a company that laid off nearly 12,000 workers in 2 years suddenly developed a deep passion for celebrating American heritage, or whether maybe there is something else going on here. Because let's talk about what Union Pacific has been doing while they have been polishing the brass on Big Boy 4014 and planning whistle stops for the cameras. In September 2018, the railroad announced a new operating philosophy called Unified Plan 2020, which was their version of something the industry calls Precision Scheduled Railroading, PSR. If you have not heard of PSR, the concept is simple enough that a Wall Street analyst could understand it. You run fewer trains, you make them longer and heavier, you close facilities you do not need anymore, and you lay off the workers who used to staff them. Wall Street loves PSR because it crushes your operating ratio and sends your stock price through the roof. The workers and the communities that depend on the railroad tend to feel differently about it, especially the workers who suddenly find themselves without jobs in industries that barely exist outside of railroading. Between September 2018 and July 2020, Union Pacific eliminated 11,711 jobs. That is not a typo, and it is not an exaggeration. Almost 12,000 people who had careers on the railroad, some of them third or fourth generation railroaders whose families had worked for Union Pacific going back to the days when their grandfathers could have seen a big boy in actual revenue service hauling artillery shells over Sherman Hill during the war, were told their positions had been eliminated in the name of efficiency. The railroad closed engine shops in Butler, Wisconsin, Hinkle, Oregon, El Paso, Texas, South Morrill, Nebraska, and Pine Bluff, Arkansas. They furloughed mechanical workers by the hundreds. They placed remaining employees on RULA, required unpaid leave of absence, which meant 1 week off per month without pay, and try explaining that to your mortgage company. Management took what they called pay cuts that still left the CEO pulling down $11 million a year in total compensation from his base salary and his stock options. And here is where it gets really interesting, where the story of the big boy intersects with the story of precision scheduled railroading, PSR, in a way that Union Pacific probably wishes you did not know about. In January 2020, right in the middle of all these layoffs, Union Pacific announced it was trimming its steam and heritage program as well. The famous Challenger locomotive number 3985, which had been part of the excursion fleet since the 1980s and had pulled passenger specials across the Union Pacific system for decades, was officially retired because it needed too much work and the railroad did not have the resources to maintain 2 operational steam engines anymore. The railroad said that all Union Pacific operations are being streamlined under precision scheduled railroading, PSR. They added that the Cheyenne Steam Shop would remain in operation, but they made it clear everything was being cut back. Everything was being examined for cost savings. The heritage program was not immune. But somehow, Big Boy 4014 survived the cuts. The locomotive cost an estimated $4 to $5 million to restore from a museum display piece back in 2019. It burns expensive fuel oil and requires a specialized crew that takes years to train. It has absolutely no practical purpose whatsoever except public relations. That one they kept. They let the Challenger go. They let 12,000 workers go. But they kept the big boy, because the big boy generates headlines and the Challenger does not, and laid-off machinists in Pine Bluff definitely do not. You want to know what Ed Dickens, the manager of Union Pacific's heritage program, called the big boy restoration back when they were planning it? Back in 2012, when they first announced they were going to bring a big boy back to life, he called it a public relations gesture. Those are his words, spoken to a room full of railroad enthusiasts who were thrilled to hear that someone was finally going to restore one of these machines. A public relations gesture that would turn into a mobile billboard for the Union Pacific brand, something so spectacular that news cameras and railroad enthusiasts would follow it everywhere it went, generating the kind of positive coverage that no amount of paid advertising could ever buy. And when you understand that this has always been the purpose of the STEAM program, not preservation for its own sake, not heritage as a cultural good, but marketing pure and simple, then the timing of this coast-to-coast tour starts to make a different kind of sense. Think about what Union Pacific is asking for with this merger. They want federal approval to absorb Norfolk Southern, creating a single railroad that would control 43% of all freight traffic in the United States. They want to reduce the number of Class 1 railroads from 6 to 5, eliminating one of the only remaining competitive options for shippers who need to move goods across the eastern half of the country. They have promised all kinds of benefits in their application: better service, more efficient operations, billions of dollars in capital investments that will transform the network. But critics point out that every major railroad merger in the last 30 years has led to service disruptions and job losses, and there is no historical reason to believe this one would be any different. Senator Chuck Schumer called it dangerous consolidation and monopoly power. The other Class 1 railroads have filed formal objections. The unions are nervous about what this means for the remaining workers. Public opinion actually matters here, and Union Pacific knows it. So what do you do if you are Union Pacific and you want to change the conversation at the exact moment when regulators are reviewing your merger application? You bring out the big boy. You send it on a tour that will dominate railroad news coverage for months. You schedule public display days in Roseville and Ogden, where families can bring their children to see the largest steam locomotive in the world. And you put out press releases about celebrating American innovation and honoring the workers who built this country. You make it very hard for anyone to say anything negative about the railroad when there is a 600-ton steam engine pulling heritage passenger cars through their town, with the whistle screaming and the ground shaking and people crying because they never thought they would see anything like this. That is not cynicism on my part. That is just how public relations works. And Union Pacific has been doing it longer and better than most companies have existed. But here is what really tells the story, the detail that I cannot get out of my head. When Union Pacific announced this tour, CEO Jim Vena said that Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern employees can bring their families to key stops on the route as a celebration of where we came from and where we are headed. Norfolk Southern employees at a Union Pacific corporate event. For a tour that is happening while the two companies are legally required to operate as separate competitors until any merger is officially approved. You do not invite Norfolk Southern families to your whistle-stop events unless you are already thinking about them as part of your company, unless the merger is already done in your mind. Unless the whole point of this exercise is to start integrating the corporate cultures before the federal government has even decided whether to say yes. The eastern leg of the Big Boy Tour, the part that requires running over Norfolk Southern track to reach cities that Union Pacific could not otherwise access, does not have a detailed schedule yet. Union Pacific says they are still working on it, still coordinating with what they call partner railroads, still figuring out the logistics of running a steam locomotive across track they do not own. But if the merger goes through, there will not be any partner railroads on the eastern run. It will all be Union Pacific from Cheyenne to the Atlantic. Big Boy 4014 could run from California to New York entirely on home rails, and the tour that is supposedly celebrating American independence will really be celebrating the creation of the largest railroad monopoly since the federal government broke up the Northern Securities Company back in 1904. None of this means you should not go see the Big Boy if you get the chance. It is a magnificent machine, one of only 25 ever built, and the only one that still runs. And the sound of it under power is something that no recording can capture and no description can do justice to. The men who maintain it are craftsmen whose skills would have been respected by the boilermakers and machinists who built the original locomotives 80 years ago. And they have kept that knowledge alive through decades when nobody thought it would ever be needed again. When 4014 comes through your town with the ground shaking, the steam roaring, and the whistle echoing off buildings that were not there the last time a Big Boy ran the main line, you should absolutely be there, because you might not get another opportunity, and because some things are genuinely worth seeing regardless of whatever corporate agenda happens to be behind them. But you should also know what you are looking at when you watch it pass. You are looking at the railroad's most effective marketing tool, deployed at the exact moment when the railroad needs public goodwill more than it has in decades, funded by a company that somehow found millions for locomotive restoration while telling 12,000 workers that their jobs had been eliminated because times were tight. You are looking at a celebration of heritage by a railroad that eliminated almost a third of its workforce in the name of precision and efficiency, that now wants to eliminate one of its major competitors, and that apparently believes you will not think too hard about the contradiction as long as the big boy keeps rolling, the whistle keeps blowing, and the cameras keep filming. The western leg of the tour ends in late April, right around the time Union Pacific submits its revised merger application to the Surface Transportation Board. The timing is what it is. The locomotive is what it is. And whatever happens next with the regulators, the lawyers, and the politicians, Big Boy 4014 will go back to Cheyenne, back to the steam shop, back to waiting for the next time Union Pacific needs it. Because that's what heritage locomotives are really for, not for the workers who built them, not for the communities they used to serve, not even for the rail fans who stand trackside and feel something in their chest when the whistle blows. For the corporation, when the corporation needs them.